Welcome to episode 47 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Hi there.
Hey, Andrew. As we tackle a different featured topic each episode. New ones are normally out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite platform to get the latest first. Please do rate and review us, and drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com, or, of course, in the comments. As always, thanks for listening, and now it's time to introduce our featured topic and guest for this episode.
Anyone who follows cybersecurity news knows that there are plenty of threats out there. We'll cover a sampling of the latest coming up in our headlines segment, but one threat doesn't have to do with phishing emails, unpatched vulnerabilities, or ransomware. It's simply the lack of trained cybersecurity professionals to fill an ever-increasing number of positions.
As we are based in Indiana, we thought we'd localize the issue, but make no mistake, it's not limited to where we are. Joining us is Dr. Mark Rogers, Executive Director of the Purdue Cyber Apprenticeship Program, and a partner on the recently launched CyberSeek Indiana website, which has resources relating to the cybersecurity workforce from various perspectives. Dr. Rogers, thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me this morning.
So before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at Purdue and the program there?
Certainly, yes. I'm a professor at Purdue in the Purdue Polytechnic Institute in the Department of Computer and Information Technology. And I wear a couple different hats. I'm the assistant dean and I'm responsible for all the cybersecurity initiatives in the college. I'm also the executive director of the Purdue Cyber Apprenticeship Program, and I'm the chief scientist for the high-tech crime unit for the Tippecanoe County Prosecutor's Office and Purdue. So they're all kind of related. So basically, my focus is on cybersecurity research, education, and workforce development and training. That, obviously for the state of Indiana is a big focus, but also, some of the national initiatives that Purdue has.
And so the Purdue Cyber Apprenticeship Program, this is intended to sort of build an educational pipeline into these unfilled positions, correct?
Yeah, and then actually it's education and a little more. It's really looking at taking the model that I think everybody's used to as far as, electricians and plumbers and more traditional applied kind of occupations and putting that same type of applied skills and training into the cybersecurity realm. We have a grant from the Department of Labor through the ETA, and we have a 4-year cyber apprentice program. And what it does, it's national, so it's right across the entire U.S. And part of this is really trying to, like you said, increase the numbers of skilled cybersecurity professionals nationwide and in the state of Indiana. We face a real shortage. Traditionally, a university like Purdue, we're putting out students through a 4-year degree or a 4-year then plus graduate degree. And while those folks are needed, skilled professionals are needed right across the board. And we just cannot produce enough graduates from our traditional university programs to fill that skills gap. And this is really, a traditional kind of a hands-on approach as well. Even when they do graduate from a degree program, there still is a skill up. There still is the kind of the on-the-job training component. So what we've done is we're working with partners like Indiana government and the Department of Workforce Development and Burning Glass with the CyberSeek Indiana website and our program to really look at how do we connect folks that are really interested in either coming into this career from something else and looking to get, a job to do this in this area, as well as trying to basically connect them with the companies that obviously have this desire and this need and this gap for this talent pool. So what we try to do is kind of a matchmaker. We connect the companies that are looking for talent with a kind of a pre-screened kind of workforce that basically is really wanting to be part of this. And we vet the folks in our pool by, what kind of training do they have, education, prior experience, any type of transitioning out of the military. That, vets are a big focus of the program. And it's an apprentice program. So the companies basically will hire somebody from that, that we have connected them to. They are registered in a federal apprenticeship program, which means the companies can actually take advantage of a lot of incentives that both state and federal government have for companies that are taking part in the apprenticeship. There's tax incentives, there's training incentives, there's earn and learn, skill up incentives, like I said, both at the federal and the state. And then what these individuals do is then these apprentices then have a company that's they've got a job, and it's kind of a halftime go to work, halftime do this the training. Now the training does include, like you mentioned, the traditional education, so a 4-year. We also have partnered with Vincennes University on a 2-year associates. They also have a 1-year certificate. We've partnered with IUPUI for a master's in cybersecurity. So there's lots of options on the education side, but we also look at the training side. We actually have some boot camp training that we do, an 8-week and a 16-week that brings people out at a certain level of proficiency with a certificate from Purdue indicating this is the levels they have. We've mapped all this back to something called the NIST framework for cybersecurity. So the government and employers know what skills and abilities and competencies these people have depending upon where they come out of the program. And then we also offer training and prep classes for individuals that are really looking at getting, as well as the education and training, a industry recognized certification. So a CompTIA Security Plus, a CEH, the ECC Ethical Hacking, CISSP. So it's a combination of getting the on-the-job training with an employer sponsor, an education component, the training component, and these very valuable industry certifications. And these are all recognized by government and by the companies that these are the certifications they want their employees to have, because it's kind of proof that not only do they have the knowledge, but they can actually do the job.
With the situation where you have the skill question being such a big piece of it, how important is it to have those specific certifications and tying that into the NIST framework, as you said, to prospective employers?
Oh, it's extremely important, because a lot of employers, while they know they need these cybersecurity professionals, their company isn't a cybersecurity company. So they really are looking at some type of gold standard, some type of proof that the folks that they're getting at least have, a minimum amount of knowledge, skills, and abilities and competencies to do the job, that they're hiring them to do. And this is where something like the NIST framework gives the companies a way of looking at, okay, if I hire somebody that says that they're this particular thing, a cybersecurity analyst, then this is what I can expect them to be able to do as far as tasks at work. And we actually have defined an occupation within our federal standard that we've registered, which is the cybersecurity support analyst, which is really an umbrella occupation for pretty much anything that anybody is going to be doing within the cybersecurity. In there, we have 8 job functions that the individuals are supposed to have and be able to do by the time that they finish and graduate out of our apprenticeship program, which really raises them through that seniority level. And again, that's mapped back to this framework. So companies go, okay, I understand what that is. So if they're looking at hiring somebody or partnering with us, or they're partnering with another university or somebody else, it's kind of a way of saying, oh, I understand this is a common standard that I know that these people are going to be able to do that. And that's extremely important because, like I mentioned before, this is really an applied area. Obviously the education is important. Having, the knowledge and abilities are important, but it's the skills. It's how do you actually handle the workplace environment? It's a big difference between sitting in a lab here at Purdue working on an exercise and being in the midst of a Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack if you're the security person. So you need to have those operational skills, and you only get that from the on-the-job training, from the practical piece of it. Now, we also have a cyber range, so we can help folks that haven't got a lot of experience yet skill up with that. And companies are even looking at taking their current employees and maybe not just bringing somebody new from the outside, but looking at the current talent pool they have within their own organization and what we call kind of skilling those folks up. But having that ability, that practical, the skills component to go along with the knowledge is extremely important. And this is like that framework has really helped companies understand, okay, what is it I want this person to do? And how do I make sure that at least at a minimum, the individual I'm hiring can do that?
So digging into the local aspect of this a bit, if I'm not mistaken, CyberSeek is a more widely recognized national program, but you are working specifically on CyberSeek Indiana, the website. So what does this website do differently to sort of hone in on our local regional issues here?
Yeah, and exactly that. It's really like taking a kind of a national view and distilling it down to the state. Really looking at, you can go by county as far as where certain job opportunities are. So it's really taking that same idea that CyberSeek has nationally and really allowing it to focus, on the state of Indiana and the different needs that we have, especially when it comes to looking at, okay, there might be this company is looking for these skill sets. The individual that's looking at being hired goes, I may not have all of those. Where can I go for that additional training or education? So it lists all the different training providers that, that are registered with the state of Indiana as far as recognized training programs that have to be, they've got to be vetted. So there's some, again, kind of some standards that go into these training companies and groups that are listed. So really, like I said, it hones it in more on what are the specific needs for the state of Indiana. Literally, you can go down almost by county. I think you can go by county. You can definitely go by city and look what are the job opportunities that are there? What are who are the companies? What are the skill sets? And who are the training partners from education right up and including the industry recognized certification. So it's really allowing folks that want to focus on Indiana itself, giving them kind of more of a micro view as opposed to having to wade through all the national information that's out there.
And it does have the sort of a local version of the national heat map, which is one resource that CyberSeek is especially known for. Take us through a little bit how Indiana compares nationally in terms of this particular issue of the dearth of employees.
Yeah, and it's amazing because a lot of folks, they think, oh my goodness, cybersecurity and, companies getting attacked, that's something that's going to happen in California, Silicon Valley, or, on the East Coast, you're going to see like New York or Washington get attacked. Every company, every business in the United States is a potential victim, including the ones that are in Indiana. We're suffering the same type of a skills gap that everybody else is. We have an extremely large advanced manufacturing industry in Indiana. And up till now, that wasn't seen as something that really needed to be a concern for protecting, but we're learning very quickly that, supply chain and advanced manufacturing is a big target of these hackers. So we'd like to think that, that we're the Midwest, so maybe, who's going to try to attack companies? Well, guess what? Pretty much everybody is. So this is a national problem. We're not immune from it. And we have I would argue that every company today is a cyber company, whether they know it or not. The minute you're connected to the internet, the minute you rely on anything to do with internet technology to run your business, you are a cyber company. And you are then, therefore, a potential target. We've got we've got energy, advanced manufacturing, we've got software development. Definitely, we've got a lot of healthcare providers. We've got a lot of, military contractors. We have big, military training bases like Crane in the South. These are all targets, and they're sitting right here in little old Indiana.
Well, and it's interesting you say that pretty much every company is a cyber company. And I think one of the reasons why we've maybe seen a few extra attacks on some big targets lately is because maybe they don't fully recognize that just yet, or they didn't before.
Exactly. And we tend to get tunnel vision. We tend to think that, well, nation state or, the Russian hackers are going to go after some military installation, some very large, typical type of infrastructure, like maybe the banking institutions. But anything that's an infrastructure, and a large majority, especially of the infrastructure related to energy and supply chain and everything else, is actually private sector. So all those companies were realizing very quickly, you're a target. And if you're not the initial target, you may be a pass-through target because of a relationship that you have with a bigger entity. So pretty much anybody that's connected to the internet as far as a business has, at least to some extent, a need for cybersecurity and, well-trained professionals within this field.
So this website obviously sounds like a great place to start looking if you're a job seeker as far as finding where the demand in the field is in your area. But obviously the website covers a lot of different sections for a lot of different use cases. So let's kind of dive into one of those. How does CyberSeek Indiana provide resources for educators and students?
For educators and students, we get, we're always asked, especially when, I was the former department head of CIT. One of the first things that we get asked by parents as well, so if my kid goes into cybersecurity, does that mean they have to move to California and, to get a job? And we go, absolutely not. Look at all the opportunities that these kids will have. It's right here in the state of Indiana if they want to stay here. So in a lot of ways, it's really comforting to the parents to know that, oh, okay, my kids may want to leave the nest and take off to the east or the west coast. There is job opportunities right here in the state of Indiana. So that always is kind of a factor that parents and prospective students look at as far as what careers do I want to go in. And when you can show them this visually, it's like, wow, look at all the opportunities we have here. As far as the other part for the educators is we get an idea of the trends. We get an idea of what are the skills that the companies are looking for. We look at the postings. We look at, okay, what kind of certifications? What are the top trending certifications that we have? One of the other hats I wear is the executive director for something called the Center, which is the training arm of the grant that does all of the boot camps. And we also do the industry certifications. And one of the things we always look at is there are actually a lot of industry certifications. Which ones are the folks going to be most interested in? And we can go out to Cyberseek Indiana, and say, okay, the state of Indiana, we're seeing, a large percentage of companies are asking for people with this industry certification. And given the information that is available, there's not enough people around that have that, or vice versa. There's too many people that have a certification, and that's really not something industry is asking for. That way we can kind of tailor what we're going to be offering in the next 6 months as far as some of our boot camps and our industry certification. So it's all about, a great place to get some data that's relevant to the state of Indiana that decisions can be made from as educators, decisions can be made from as far as students looking at, okay, yep, this is something I want to get into, or being able to say, hey, look, I live in Bloomington. What's being offered at IU related to training in my area? I live in Fort Wayne. What can I do there? And now with everything, pretty much most of the training being at least available both online and in person, even the geographic location isn't so much a factor anymore. But if it is, you can look at what's available close to where you are.
So for the people that you mentioned, potentially training up people within a company or a job seeker who maybe is looking at this information and sees maybe there's some opportunity here in cybersecurity, but they may be a little scared of how much training they would need to undertake. There are a lot of different levels of training and the amount of time and commitment needed, right?
Yeah, and that's correct. And this is something that we do through our apprenticeship program. That's why we have all these different options. Not everybody has to have a master's degree in cybersecurity to be in the industry, and not every company is looking for something like that. There are opportunities at all the different levels. But one of the things you did mention is it can be a little bit overwhelming, like, wow, what do I need to do? And this is where, through our program, we actually help both the companies and the what we call the candidates. So the pre-apprentices or the folks that are interested, we walk them through some of this decision-making process. What makes sense? What are they looking for? What do they really need to do as far as that training? What's going to fit their background? What's going to fit their career aspirations? And we actually do that coaching or that mentoring. And then we then tailor make kind of the program for them within certain confines. And we also, through the apprenticeship program, because let me be honest, a lot of the training is not cheap for this stuff. It's expensive to get certifications. It's expensive to go and do a boot camp or do even the online training through some of the great online. It's not cheap because there's an investment that has to go into it. So we also can help the individuals, the apprentices, say, hey, here's a way of offsetting the cost. Get in with a company, get a relationship with company X. They will pay for these certifications. They will pay for the training. And one of the things that we're doing, because we're finding that, coming out of COVID, companies are still a little bit, from a budget perspective, a little bit lean, is we're offering something called a Kickstart program, where we will cover up to $5,000 for companies that take on an apprentice to offset the initial cost of training. And that would get somebody through our 16-week cybersecurity analyst training certificate program, and that would get them the CompTIA Security Plus, which is what we consider to be kind of the initial, not a beginning, but kind of an intermediate level that they could drop inside that company and actually help them with their cybersecurity needs. And we're calling that the Kickstart program as a way of kind of, obviously kickstarting this relationship.
Right. One of the tools on the website that particularly interested me was this career pathway, I guess, sort of mapping tool. Really wish something like that existed 10 years ago for me.
Oh, yeah, me too. I'll go with 10 years as well.
If you want to set one up for my next 10 years, that'd be wonderful.
And actually, this is something that's really interesting, because you make a good point. We are actually trying to look into a crystal ball and predict what jobs are going to be, or what the actual job roles are going to be for a career that 5 years ago, half of these positions probably didn't even exist. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there'll be new ones that we don't even know. So it's a real challenge and this is obviously, a data analytics and a predictive and a real moving target. But like you said, man, I wish there had been something like that, when I started off in this. But it's a real challenge to try and, like I said, predict even 5-10 years out. It's such a moving target with cybersecurity.
Right.
And before we let you go, we would be remiss if we didn't take advantage of some of your cybercrime expertise in terms of research, publications of that nature to talk about the current climate. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but what's your reaction to seeing how big of an issue ransomware in particular has become, in just the last several months? Now we're seeing national, international news stories about this every day and all sorts of victims out there, which, were already happening to some degree. But I think that front and center nature of the coverage has really taken it to the next level.
Oh, yeah, totally agree. I've been doing this for over 30 years now, and we predicted this. This has always been a progression. There's always been, this is something that didn't surprise anybody in the industry. You're seeing them, more and more of these cyber attackers become emboldened, more and more of them hiding behind other nation states. And this is basically the new phase of cybercrime, hacking, and warfare, and where one ends and the other begins is been completely fuzzed out. And like I said, a lot of the stuff that's happening right now is a lot more in the press. We're a lot more aware of it, partly because there's a lot more, I would say that these folks have been emboldened by the level of protection that they think they can get by, hiding behind certain borders and things like that. And unfortunately, everybody, if we're looking at putting our crystal ball, putting our wizard's hat on, it's going to get worse before it gets better. The fact that they're actually starting now to be able to basically disrupt the cryptocurrency chain and basically say, yeah, we're going to pay the money, but you're never going to get it. We're going to take it back. That is going to basically change the tactics. But it's always an arms race. We're always trying to catch up with, the latest attack or the latest trend, the cyber criminals. But the biggest thing I think that's accelerated this is when I first started, it was kind of your lone actor. It was your stereotypical kind of disgruntled employee or disenfranchised youth in the basement of their mom's, place doing silly things on the internet. And it's gone from that to basically criminal organizations to nation states. And once you hit the nation state level, it basically becomes a completely different problem because now you get into the whole geopolitical landscape. But unfortunately, I think it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better.
On that optimistic note, how about
that's why companies need to hire more people. I'm part of our program because it's not going to go away. And while the economy is soft, this is exactly when the bad guys hit. They don't wait till we're all positioned nicely and all protected. They hit you at your weakest point. So I'm very concerned about the fact that the economy isn't at the level it should be. We're kind of slowly crawling our way out. Companies are not wanting to make a commitment to this, and that's not being lost on our adversaries. They understand, hit you when you're down, right? And that's exactly what we're seeing.
So where can people go to learn more about what we discussed today?
They can come to our website, and it's basically purdue.edu/PCAP, or just go into your favorite search engine and type in Purdue University Cyber Apprenticeship Program. My information is there. It's pretty easy to remember. It's rogersmk@purdue.edu. Send me an email. I'd be more than happy to talk with folks that are basically wannabe apprentices and companies that are looking at being sponsors of the apprentices.
And of course, the website cyberseekin.org as well. Dr. Rogers, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now it's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we take a closer look at the top stories in the cybersecurity world and talk about what they may mean to you. Now, headline number 1. Feds recover millions from pipeline ransom hackers, hint at U.S. internet tactic. So the U.S. has recovered much of the ransom payment the Russian hacker group DarkSide extorted from Colonial Pipeline this year, according to the Justice Department. As you may recall, Colonial paid out $4.4 million of ransom in that particular case, and the FBI says they were able to seize control of DarkSide's proceeds by gaining access to a central account holding about 63.7 bitcoins worth around $2.3 million. So a little more than half there.
Yeah, definitely a little bit more than half. Of course, the authorities would not share their secrets as to how they got this done, hoping to continue using this tactic in the future, but they did hint that part of the success lies in the fact that a lot of cryptocurrency infrastructure is located here in the United States, and as such, they are able to extend their legal jurisdiction to actually go ahead and hack into those. I don't know if hack's the right word, but warrant their way into those. And again, they wouldn't give any details, but obviously there is some sort of tactic at play here that is a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, a court document said that the seizure took place in Northern California, so it was in U.S. jurisdiction, as you said, and the FBI was able to access the private key or password, otherwise known as, for one of the gang's Bitcoin wallets. Not clear as to how that key was compromised, and Elvis Chan, a special agent with the FBI, did say that they were not relying on waiting for criminals to use U.S. cryptocurrency services. It did, however, rely on the fact that so much infrastructure is based in the U.S. internet-wise, not even just Bitcoin, but internet infrastructure in general. So, yeah, in fact, it was even touched on in our interview a little bit, as this is potentially something of a game changer moving forward.
Right, and just to clarify, this wasn't actually the DarkSide ransomware group itself that was, I guess, rebuffed here, but in fact the subcontractors who had used the ransomware as a service. And so it's starting to seem to certain players as they're investigating this that maybe the subcontractors themselves that carried out the targeting and attacking on behalf of DarkSide was maybe a bit on the novice side.
Yeah, a common terminology for that is affiliates in the ransomware as a service game, and we did talk about in previous episodes how some of the more sophisticated ransomware as a service operators are cracking down a little bit on those affiliates to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again. It almost makes you wonder if the RAS space may kind of pull back a little bit, and they might take it upon themselves, these groups, to just do it all themselves. If you can't do if something doesn't get done right, then do it yourself.
Can't trust your contractors out there. So this seems to be a bit of a multi-pronged effort that led to this, and one that's being praised as a pretty good example of how the private and public sectors can work together to resolve these kinds of issues. So not only did you have the FBI involved, you obviously had the Colonial Pipeline Company with their own task force and remediation teams involved. Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center aided in the investigation. So quite a few people chipped in to make this happen, it seems.
Yeah, Jen Ellis, quoted in this NBC piece, she's a co-author of a ransomware task force report, said that this was fantastic news, and said this kind of collaboration between victims and law enforcement is exactly what we need to see. Hopefully, if we see actions like this continue, it'll encourage other victims to disclose attacks to law enforcement and also make it harder for ransomware attackers to realize a payday. And that is a kind of a common theme we'll talk about in another story coming up, that the FBI really does want to get these reports to them. If there's no visibility on their front, and there are certainly cases where companies want to keep this on the down low, but if there's no visibility, then there's not too much they can do to help. And now to see a real tangible example of actually money from a ransom being recovered, that should go a long way, I think, to encouraging companies to report when they have been attacked.
Right, and while this story is a bit of a silver lining, you still have to point to the dark cloud inside that silver lining, which is that DarkSide has gathered around $90 million since it became active in just October. So while it's great that this $2.3 million was recovered, it's really just a small scratch to their overall activity. So remains to be seen whether this will be as big of a game changer as we think it is, or if it'll sort of be a one and done wrist slap kind of activity.
Of course, DarkSide, as we talk about them, the group doesn't exactly exist in its same form anymore either. That's something that wasn't mentioned in this piece, but we talked about last time, is after the Colonial situation, they kind of went underground. So we'll see how they reemerge, as they most likely will. One other tidbit that this story mentioned that I had not noticed about the Colonial Pipeline attack before. This happened back in April, as we know, and we talked about the ransom amount being paid rather quickly by Colonial. They were hoping to get operations back up and running quick, so they did not mess around too much with negotiations and did pay that $4.4 million ransom. However, the report here in NBC says DarkSide's decryptor program was so slow that Colonial ended up not using it and instead restored its system from old backup files, and it was about a 5-day window where the pipeline systems were down. So just thought that was an interesting tidbit and another reason why paying the ransom is not always the best route to go. Now, headline number 2, and this is kind of a mishmash compilation of a few different headlines because there's just so much out there right now relating to ransomware. We had the first story was about ransomware, but this one is about some other ransomware attacks, starting with probably the most high-profile one in the last couple of weeks since we last recorded, and that is that the world's largest meat processing company has resumed most production after an early June cyber attack, but experts say the vulnerabilities exposed by this attack and others are far from resolved. So this was a Brazil-based meat processor, JBS SA, but their American operations were affected in particular, and the attack was attributed to REvil, a Russian-speaking gang that has made some of the largest ransomware demands on record in recent months. And I learned recently, I don't know if you saw this, but REvil stands for ransomware evil.
Oh, well, at least they're self-aware.
Yes.
So, yeah, as you said, JBS, one of the largest meat processing companies, not just in the United States, but in the world, was down for about a day. So this wasn't a huge, long, drawn-out kind of attack, much smaller issue than the Colonial Pipeline. But obviously, when you're talking something as critical as an entire nation's food supply, things get pretty sweaty pretty quickly under the collar.
Yeah.
So we do not know if the ransom was paid. Everybody's pretty tight-lipped about that and exactly how this was resolved, but it seems it was cleaned up quickly enough.
Yeah, the attack targeted servers supporting JBS's operations in North America and Australia. The company said it was not aware of any customer, supplier, or employee data being compromised, and backup servers were not affected. So they were able to get back up and running quickly, and so we'll see if there really is any kind of major impact from it. It's more just the idea of the potential impact, which then goes along with the fact that you said Colonial Pipeline being an effect on the gas supply. We've had the food supply now being impacted by a ransomware attack. We've seen medical issues relating to ransomware attacks. We've seen beer supply. You know, for some people, that's more important than food.
Yeah, between the hacks on steaks, Coors Light, and all these wineries, somebody's trying to cancel 4th of July on us.
Yeah. Not a good time for summer and everything. But yeah, I mean, it just is another illustration of companies being impacted that, you know, they're not government entities, but they provide sort of an essential product or service.
Right. And so in October of last year, a representative for REvil, who goes by the handle UNKN, which I assume is pronounced unknown, published an interview online in which he claimed that the agriculture sector would be a huge target for REvil in the coming years. So we were kind of warned about this.
Yes, that's definitely something that was foreshadowed a little bit. And ransomware expert Alan Liska of Recorded Future said JBS was the largest food manufacturer yet to be hit by ransomware, but he said at least 40 food companies have been targeted by ransomware gangs over the last year. We just talked about Molson Coors, and you mentioned the wine, E&J Gallo Winery, among others. Liska says, though, the food companies are at about the same level of security as manufacturing and shipping, which is to say, not very. Not sure about subject-verb agreement there, but it goes to what we were just talking about with Dr. Rogers. Every company is a cyber company, but some of them maybe didn't recognize it until after they were just attacked.
Right, and you spoke about the prevalence of advanced manufacturing here in the state of Indiana, and you have to wonder if that security is on the same level that they're talking about in this article.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, the other issue is the supply chain stuff, which was a big deal in the Sunburst attack last year. These types of companies, if they are not necessarily the focus of an attack, could still be a way into to an even bigger target too. So very important for this type of industry to tighten up that cybersecurity.
Right. So looking at the numbers, we thankfully had an assistant professor of agriculture at Michigan State University who was able to crunch some equations for us and figure out exactly the impact of this one-day shutdown, which he calculated to be the equivalent of about 20,000 beef cows.
Yes.
I don't know the conversion metrics to get that into burgers, but it's quite a few, I imagine.
Yeah, he said that it would be about a quarter of the beef processing capacity of JBS, which is the second largest producer of beef, pork, and chicken in the U.S. So, meat industry follower Mark Jordan, that's an interesting title too, I think, as an expert. He's with Leap Market Analytics, said the disruption to the food supply will likely be minimal in this case. Meat has around a 14-day window to move through the market, and if a plant is closed for a day or two, companies can usually make up for lost production with extra shifts. So we may have dodged a meatball here, as it were, and so could be okay from this one and not have any major issues coming from it, but it's more the signal of what it could be.
So I'm not going to be able to resell my bags of meat in the basement that I stockpiled last week.
Well, hopefully you at least, put them in the fridge or froze them or something.
I keep them in the trunk of my car.
Aged to perfection, I guess.
Yeah, that's one way to say it.
So another piece of this puzzle, talking about REvil in particular, is the idea of triple extortion as a new tactic. So we've sort of touched on this a little bit before, but the conventional old school wisdom of ransomware is just that somebody breaches an individual company or network and locks up their files and demands a ransom, and that's it.
Well, that's extortion 1.
Yeah, that's extortion level 1. Double extortion, this is like Triple Frontier, the Netflix movie from a couple years ago. Double extortion goes further by tacking on threats to leak the data of that company. So they exfiltrate some of that data before they encrypt it and either threaten to or do post it somewhere else and maybe make some money off of it that way or do some reputation damage. And so that's extortion level 2, and then triple extortion goes even further and will either go after customers, partners, or other third parties related to the initial breach to extort even more money. So basically, if you were a butcher, for instance, and you're a direct customer of JBS, in this kind of scenario, you may also be getting a ransomware demand to at least have some sort of threat of your data being exposed or something like that, just because you're associated with JBS. So that's sort of the triple aspect, and there are twists on triple there too, where DDoS attacks can be involved as well. But this is just taking it to another level, basically.
Yeah, so one recent example in the real world of triple extortion involved a mental health facility being hacked, and the hackers reached out to the actual patients whose files they were able to nab and began to threaten to publish those, trying to get more money out of the patients themselves. So you had obviously the files and the leaked data threat against the healthcare facility, as well as a third triple extortion attempt against the customers or clients themselves.
Yeah, so even if you are not the one who was specifically breached, if you have some sort of affiliation with somebody who was breached, then it's a little worse than just potentially having some of your personal information like email, passwords, stuff like that exposed in a breach. In that situation, you could actually be directly targeted by these ransomware groups or affiliates. So just another thing to watch out for. We don't really have a tip there or anything, but just something for situational awareness. And so that was just the JBS attack, basically, but just wanted to touch on a couple of others that are out there now. And this one probably would have been a bigger story about 15, 20 years ago. Fujifilm confirmed that the company suffered a ransomware attack that disrupted its business operations. On June 1st, the company shut down all networks and servers to determine the extent and scale of the attack and suspended all affected systems in coordination with their various global entities. This one looks like it was centered in Japan.
Right, and we joke that Fujifilm's a bit of a maybe dated corporation, but they actually do have some real-world implications spinning out of the this attack, Fujifilm is involved in the processing of COVID tests. So there is some impact to the healthcare infrastructure as a side effect of this attack.
Yep. So that's another example of a fairly high-profile one. And on Capitol Hill, the congressional offices use a specific provider for newsletters called iConstituent, and that one also has been reportedly hit by a ransomware attack. So that meant that about 60 House of Representatives offices from both parties have not been able to retrieve constituent information from that vendor for several weeks. The Office of the Chief Administrative Officer in the House, they said they were notified by iConstituent that their e-newsletter system was hit with a ransomware attack. It's an external service, and there's no apparent impact to any House data, but if they house it in some way, you'd think that maybe constituents could have some information out there at some point.
Yeah, it seems maybe the biggest potential threat out there is just the actual contact info data that this system would house. So this is not affecting any House data. Of course, this is just a constituent outreach program that multiple House users use, as well as various different state parties around the nation. So if you didn't get your good morning text from Bernie this morning, this might be why.
Yeah, but these are just a few examples. We could have kept going down this list even further. There are warnings out there for educators in the UK by their national cybersecurity organization. We talked about healthcare warnings with ransomware. Just a lot of stuff going down every day, and just continues to bear watching, and we'll see where things go. Now, headline number 3, the rise of cybersecurity debt. So this is a piece from TechCrunch by Howard Boville, and he's basically discussing a lot of the issues of the day that we've just been talking about, and theorizing as to why these attacks are happening and so prevalent lately. And basically, he's summarizing it to say it's cybersecurity debt based on the fact that the costs companies pay when they choose to build software the easy or fast way instead of the right way, cobbling together temporary solutions to satisfy a short-term need as teams struggle to maintain that patchwork of poorly architectured applications. Tech debt accrues in the form of a lost productivity or poor customer experience, or in this case, lost security.
Right, and so this is based on the idea in the software development world called technical debt, where, as you said, companies cut corners, cut costs, choose to do things the fast, easy, convenient way rather than the more costly and slower, correct way. So we've been recording this podcast for a while. We've talked about the IoT world and this sort of just get it out the door cheap and conveniently, and we'll not really worry about security. The customer beware of their own. This is finally coming home to roost and across these different industries in the form of cybersecurity debt that must finally be paid.
Yeah, and in these cases that we're talking about here, it's not even necessarily that they're taking the easy way out. It's also that they're just struggling to keep up with what's out there, and so they see the next threat and they buy X solution, and now there's a new threat and they buy Y solution, and over the years they just keep buying like an individual solution here, an individual solution there, and it's hard for them to actually all work together in a harmonious way and ensure that you're not leaving yourself open to other issues by not taking that step back and going, here's our entire solution.
Right. So one quote to pull from the story is that complexity is the enemy of security. Some companies are forced to put together as many as 50 different security solutions from up to 10 different vendors to protect their sprawling technology estates. And so Firewalls.com here, we actually have this sort of discussion with customers from time to time, and in this different calculus of, well, do I patchwork my security infrastructure between multiple vendors and choose the best of breed from each different manufacturer, or do I stick with one manufacturer and have a holistic solution based on one integrated sort of set of features and services all created by one centralized team and managed by one centralized team. So this is very easy to see how, with the rise of applications and the cloud and all these various different programs, as you said, where you end up with 600 different programs and 600 different solutions, and suddenly they all can't quite communicate with each other as well as they should.
Yeah, and there are certainly arguments to be made for going with a few different best-of-breed brands. We've talked about, early on the podcast in one of our early episodes with Anthony Merchaud, our colleague here, there are some advantages to splitting between other companies. Maybe some have a little bit more advanced solutions in certain areas. You also don't expose yourself as much if one of those companies gets hit really hard with something, then you still have support from somebody else. So there are reasons to do that, but if you just keep cobbling together and slapping stuff together and piling it on top of each other, then they could actually be conflicting with each other even.
Right. It's a bit of a question of whether you're building a sort of patchwork quilt of all these different things or building actual defense in depth with different layers split between these different vendors. So as you said, there are positives, there are negatives to either sort of strategy you choose, but as the complexity increases, you have more room for gaps and bottlenecks and just sort of spaces where hackers can find a way to wiggle in.
Yeah, so the recommendation here to sort of pay down this cybersecurity debt is twofold. So Bovil says, first, we must embrace open standards across all critical digital infrastructure, especially the infrastructure used by private contractors to service the government. Until recently, it was thought that the only way to standardize security protocols across a complex digital estate was to rebuild it from the ground up in the cloud. But he says this is akin to replacing the foundations of a home while still living in it. He's saying instead, open hybrid cloud architectures can connect and standardize security across any kind of infrastructure.
Right, and this will increase the visibility across the entire network, being able to, see the threat at point A as well as the implications all throughout from, down to the cloud to individual machines and orchestrate a response across all platforms at once rather than, how do we close this loop? How do we close that loop? How do we close this port? And sort of doing it one section at a time.
Yeah, and he talks about the fact that cloud providers do security themselves too. So taking advantage of that is certainly something that should be done. So the second step, he says, is to close the remaining loopholes in the data security supply chain, talking about the president's executive order, which requires federal agencies to encrypt data that's being stored or transmitted. He says that needs to even go a step further and address data that is in use.
Right. So obviously big data gets that name because it is very big. And in response to that, a lot of these companies, in order to handle all this data, are choosing to outsource the storage and processing to cloud providers. And in return, they're getting the ability not only to store that long term, but receive actual analytics to make that data useful for them. And so these executive orders are sort of leveraged at, who can access the data stored, how providers, are able to share access, if at all, in a legal framework.
Yeah, and, he says that many think that the vulnerability of this, cloud visibility of data is just something you have to deal with if you want to have those analytics and real-time details and things like that. But he says, cloud providers can and do protect their customers' data with the same ferocity as they protect their own, and they don't need access to the data they store on their servers ever. So the solution is confidential computing. And in this case, he says that encrypts data at rest, in transit, and in process.
And Bovil himself appears to be an employee at IBM, and he drew upon that experience to sort of show us what the data security IBM's cloud looks like, stating that even if they were compelled by a court order or a ransom request to share a customer's data, that's just not an option. It's not possible for IBM with the types of encryption and security layers they've put in place.
Yeah, the customers are the ones that hold the key. So the key, just like the key to that Bitcoin wallet in story number one, it rests with the customer. And so he's basically urging people to take advantage of this as an option and really utilize the cloud the secure cloud capabilities that are out there to lock up their data a little bit better. And just generally interesting to hear another perspective on sort of why all of these attacks are happening and why they're successful as of late.
Yeah, we've asked that question to about 3 or 4 guests in the last several episodes now.
And, I think there's a lot of agreement there in a lot of scenarios, but it'll just be interesting to see if there does get to be the sort of tipping point where things start to come back in a better fashion, or if things do indeed just keep getting worse for a while.
Well, in America, we tend to ignore our debts, so we'll see what happens.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, and thanks very much to Dr. Mark Rogers for joining us. Check out the links in the description for more information about everything we discussed. Subscribe or follow now however you listen to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available, and please do rate and review us. Visit Firewalls.com for all your network security needs, and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode, but in the meantime, we remind you to
get secure, stay secure.